Will Sudan return to civilian rule? A power-sharing deal between protesters and the army is signed, and a council will temporarily run the country. But who will guarantee this agreement gets implemented? And will Sudan's army really give up power? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. It was a deal months in the making. Sudan's military and protest leaders have finalized an agreement that's intended to put the nation on the path to civilian rule. Just 2 months ago, dozens of demonstrators were killed in a military crackdown. Now, the two sides will have to work together to shape new institutions for a new Sudan. We'll go to our panel in just a few moments, but first, Hiba Morgan has more from the signing ceremony in Khartoum.
It's taken more than 3 months of on and off talks between the opposition coalition known as the Forces of Freedom and Change and Sudan's ruling military junta for the two sides to put their final signatures on the power-sharing agreement, which was signed today here in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Now, the agreement states that the military will be ruling for the first 21 months of the transitional period, while the opposition coalition will be ruling for the remaining 18 months before elections are held. But the protesters on the streets are saying that they're cautiously optimistic. They're saying that they're the ones who brought about this this change in government after toppling former President Omar al-Bashir, and that they're the ones who gave legitimacy to the opposition coalition, and that they have been protesting since December for civilian rule. So they're saying that they will continue with their revolution, although in a different form. They're saying now it's time for a political protest, and that they will be keeping an eye on both the opposition coalition that represents them and the military council. And they're saying that based on Sudan's track record of implementing power-sharing agreements and peace deals, they have to be very cautious. But today they're saying that they're celebrating the fact that a deal has been signed that will eventually lead Sudan to civilian rule. And until anything happens, they're going to enjoy that moment of victory. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
The deal is the culmination of a struggle that began in late 2018. Mass protests that were initially over austerity measures grew into calls for a change in government. In April this year, the military overthrew longtime leader Omar al-Bashir and replaced him with a ruling military council. But the protests continued. Demonstrators wanted an immediate transition to civilian rule and the dismantling of old institutions. On June 3rd, the army launched a crackdown. One raid on a protest camp left dozens of people dead. Despite this, negotiations continued and a deal was reached. A transitional government will prepare Sudan for a full handover to civilian rule in a little over 3 years' time. All right, let's bring in our guests. With us here in Doha, Abdelwahab El-Affendi is professor of politics at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and author of several books on Sudan. In Khartoum, Hajooj Kuka, an award-winning filmmaker and activist. From New York, Suliman Baldo is a human rights and democracy activist and senior advisor to the Enough Project. Welcome to the program. Abdelwahab, let me start with you. What happens next, and how difficult or easy will this process be to get going?
Yes, I think from now on, maybe the idea that there's a power sharing is not accurate, because what is going to happen is that there's going to be a civilian government, which will have most of the powers to enact whatever it wants, technically or at least theoretically. And this government is supported by also should be in 3 months, a legislative council, of which 2/3 majority is also from the Forces of Freedom and Change. So I think we could say already there is an impending transition to civilian government in a sense. The council does not, as was said in the introduction, rule for 18 months. It's only a figurehead. It's be headed by a military person, but it doesn't rule. And the head of the council doesn't have any supporting vote. His vote is like anybody else. So in this regard, we're going to have generally a civilian government. Of course, there are going to be many difficulties because the military will be entrenched in the security forces, in the military, in the police, and they insisted on having control of the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior and the security forces. But I would like always to say we should look at the positive side. There was an interesting debate in Latin America when democracy theorists were accused of wishful thinking when they said democracy, welcome to Latin America. And one of the leading theorists there, he said, no, this is not wishful thinking, this is thoughtful wishing. So I'm in favor of engaging in thoughtful wishing because the issue is of will in the end. About how democracy triumphs is not an issue of objective factors, but also of will. If the people are willing and also the politicians are wise enough and they act in realistically and pragmatically, we will get there. So I'm in this sense optimistic that the dynamics is going to change. From in the beginning of next month, when the new government takes over, the dynamics in the country will change because now most of the decision will come from a civilian government.
Hajooj, what about you? Are you optimistic this agreement can work?
I'm cautious. I'm not that optimistic. The next few days will make me decide, see what I want. I'm excited that we're going to have a prime minister who's civilian. I do agree that this should not be power sharing. This should be civilians, the beginning of civilian rule. It's not complete civilian rule. But what really upsets us and what really makes me not that excited, not in a celebration mode today, is that Hemeti and Burhan, who both for us should be in a courtroom and should be in not leaders on the council. So that's my main problem. Can Sudan move forward? Can we reach peace? Can we reach overcome racism, marginalization, women rights, all those things with Hemeti occupying Khartoum and the rest of the big major cities in Sudan and all of Sudan with his forces, the Rapid Response Forces, which actually committed the last massacre on June 3rd and massacres in Darfur. Burhan himself was part of that too. So for us, it's like, how do you reach justice? And justice is the first step towards reaching a democracy and have transparency, have accountability, have participation and equality and an economy and all that. Like, can we reach economic stability in Sudan, knowing that one of the major issues we always had was that 70% of the country's resources is being used by the military. So can we expect the military to reduce their resources to 10% so we can move forward? So we have all these questions that we have. And to me, it's just like seeing Hemeti there signing and Burhan standing behind him just makes me feel like this is not going to go forward. The revolution needs to continue. And for me, the thing that the only optimism I have is the people, the revolutionaries who were out in the street will continue. And now that we have a legitimate government, that the world knows that we are the legitimate government, and once our prime minister takes over power and the executive branch, we can move forward. But do expect more protests, do expect more people going out in the street and asking for more rights. We need to get to the point where justice happens and where we can move forward.
Suliman, Hajooj was just talking about the fact that one of the things that was bringing him a sense of optimism, even though he has mixed feelings, one of the things that was bringing him a sense of optimism is the fact that a prime minister is going to be appointed. Now, this is the economist Mohammed Abdelwahab, who's been nominated by the opposition faction. And I want to ask you if you believe that this appointment will proceed as planned, or if any complications could show up in the next few days.
I don't expect complications in the confirmation of Abdullah Hamdok as prime minister. He's a consensus candidate. He had the agreement of the entire political class and the population in the country because of the expertise he brings to the job, not only as an economist, but also as an expert in good governance across the continents and globally. He has wide international relations and connections. and will be crucially important in renewing Sudan's relationships with international financial institutions in the donors community and the like. Hamdouk as prime minister, and here I agree entirely with El-Affendi, will have real powers. These are not symbolic a sort of figurehead of a civilian government that is really, a puppet government. It's a government with real clout and power, and it will be, the freedom and change forces and the civilian authorities in the executive position of the cabinet that they bring an opportunity to lose if it were ever to be lost. And therefore, cautiously optimistic, yes, because the issues of accountability and the issues of transparency appear to be grave threats, given that the army and the rapid support forces are responsible for all the atrocity crimes that you have mentioned, and are also sitting on most of the resources of the country in total, lack of transparency and accountability for their handling of these public funds.
Abdelwahab, if you could pick up on a point that Suliman was making when it comes to the accusations of atrocities that have been made against military leaders in Sudan, like General Hemeti. Now, one of the things that made it difficult in putting this agreement together was the issue of whether these military leaders would get immunity. Was that resolved? And if these military leaders in this agreement do get immunity, is there any way in which that could be revoked?
I don't think the issue of immunity is the key issue. I think, yes, I agree that this issue of accountability is a paradox, because the revolutionaries have decided that they want justice to be a top priority. Especially, there should be a committee which should investigate the massacres. We don't need to investigate the massacres. We know who committed them. And they are the members who will be in the military council. Now, an issue has to be examined. I think there are more than one issue. The issue which Hajooj rightly pointed out, which is there is currently a military occupation of Khartoum by the rapid the rapid deployment forces. And there is an issue of the influence of the military on the government. I am ready to trade the influence for the accountability. If he moves his troops out of the cities, and if the security forces are handed over to civilian government, the way, for example, what happened with Pinochet in Chile and other governments, is that you could do a bargain. Always transition to democracy needed some kind of bargain. You have to give something, get something. Of course, when you get something, the dynamics, if you have a really civilian government, the dynamics of civilian control will, in time, make it possible for you to engage in the justice issue. But at this particular juncture, if somebody, as they said, is occupying Khartoum, and you want to try him in that capital of Khartoum, or you have to have a war in this regard. So you have to think about all these things in a very pragmatic, positive way. How do you get there? One of the problems we had is that some of the revolutionaries have been so kind of absolutist in saying we have to have everything. The government has to give in and leave, and then they should come and we put them in prisons and try them, and so on and so on. And that should happen by itself. And I've always argued that it's not going to happen that way. You have to negotiate. Now, we have negotiated at one point, reached this particular juncture. The question is, you also will need some more negotiation to pass for the next steps. And I think one of the important things is, there will be many challenges facing the the incoming cabinet. And you have to look at not only the issue of justice is not the only thing. You have to revive the economy. You have to deal with the demands of the people on the street. Now, Khartoum is underwater at the moment. A lot of people have died already. And the government will need to look at this issue. And not only Khartoum, but a lot of areas in Jazeera and other parts of the country people have died. So we have to look at the urgent issues. People need bread, people need fuel. You need to work on the economy, you need to work on everything. So there are challenges. I agree with the points raised that we have dilemmas, actually.
Hajooj, you heard Abdelwahab there speak about the economy. From your point of view, what are the immediate steps that can be taken to try to turn things around there?
Well, when it comes to the economy, I mean, the main reason we think the economy is in this state is two things. One, corruption and lack of the ability to manage our resources. Sudan has a lot of resources, be it animal, agriculture, material, human resources, but has not been managed correctly for a very long time. But to me, to be able to manage it, we have to answer the deeper questions of Sudan. The biggest issue we have in Sudan has always been, since the creation of Sudan, the Sudanese identity. So for us to be able to feel like the whole country is part of this, from not just people from the center, so to get the whole country together and to get half the population, the women, part of this, we need to answer what is our identity. And to me, to be able to have that question, we had to defeat the political Islam, the Arabized political Islam that is hijacked the whole Sudanese identity to be just an Arab identity. So for me to actually move forward, we have to quickly and very decisively answer that question. What is the Sudanese identity? How do you create an identity that includes all Sudan and includes our women, so to become part of the economy and the working force? So for me, before we do that, we're just going to be a reform. We're not going to be a revolution. For us to have a revolution, and this happened in the sit-in. In the sit-in, it was very clear that the whole population was behind what was happening in Darfur. They understood what was happening in Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile. People actually started understanding each other, and the information started passing. So for us to continue that and to make it institutionalized, so instead of having institutionalized racism as part of what is happening, which was happening in the old regime, we need to move forward. And this is the first step to actually improve our economy and everything. We need to manage our resources, and to do that, we need to have a real identity.
Suliman, who will act as guarantors for this agreement?
Well, we have all the witnesses who have been co-signatories of this. The primary guarantor, of course, would be the African Union, because it was under the impulsion and insistence of the African Union of a transfer to civilian controlled government that the momentum for the negotiations between the military council and the freedom and change forces was secured. And it was African Union mediation and the mediation from Ethiopia as the chair of the IGAD organization that brought this negotiation to the conclusions today. This is the trend in international community today, that the United Nations and the members of the Security Council all defer to regional powers and regional organizations such as the African Union to lead in the resolution of the problems in the region. And this has been the trend within the African Union to solve African problems in-house rather than defer to members of the international community to do so.
Abdelwahab, speaking of the African Union, of course, suspended Sudan's membership in early June. Do you think they will reinstate it? And when might that be?
No, I think they will probably immediately reinstate it, because it was conditional on returning to the process of civilian, democratic transition, and now that transition is actually en route in a very good way. But I would add that maybe the best guarantor is the people themselves. I think the moves we have seen has always been the result of popular pressure. The Transitional Council was very adamant, for example, that the Military Council, that it doesn't want to make any concessions, and actually it said it has abandoned all its agreement it signed in the past. But when it saw the number of people on the streets in July, they then understood that you can't go ahead on that. So the unity of the people, also the clarity of vision and also the realism. You have to not push things. I think what happened, for example, in the experiences in Egypt and other countries is that people have underestimated the enemy and have overestimated their own forces. And then they lost. So we don't want this to happen in Sudan. People should focus and should remain united and should look forward, not backward. This is very important. A small point about the issue of identity. I think the issue of identity, although it's important, it cannot be resolved politically. It's an issue. What we can resolve politically is a democratic system which allows people to debate the issues of identity. But we cannot issue a decree by the government to say that we are Arab or we are not Arab, or we are Muslim or not Muslim. That won't work. And bad leaders can create identity problem where none exists. For example, in America today, Donald Trump has created a problem of identity, although there wasn't in the past such an acute problem of identity in that country. So I think our priority should always be democratic governance and good government.
Hajooj, I want to ask you, there's many people in Sudan who believe that the trial of former President al-Bashir may be a sham. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm one of the people who think it's a sham. I'm one of the people. It's not just Omar al-Bashir. The deep state in Sudan is actually the biggest issue. It could even be bigger than Hemeti himself. There's not enough people in jails. We did not have enough information on who stole what, why they're not being tried, and all that. There's one thing within the treaties that were signed, and it was actually the one before the last. And in that one, it actually specifically said that people should be tried, and even in international courts. And to me, I'm one of the people who really believes that the right way to try Omar al-Bashir is actually to try him outside. For a lot of reasons, I don't think will have a good enough trial within Sudan. And part of it is because Burhan is there and Hemeti is there, and obviously up to now we're unable to go forward. The one good thing also is now when we have a civilian government, is the real trials can start. Now that we have people we trust, and hopefully the justice system we create is going to be institutionalized, is going to be good enough to actually try the rest of the deep state and give us our rights and take away, put people in prisons and accountability and all that. So I don't think all those trials were real. I think the trials start once our general attorney is in place and he has power to actually get these people tried.
Suliman, we only have less than a minute left. I just want to ask you very quickly, where do things stand for the Islamists in Sudan right now? They're hated by so many sides. Will they be sidelined going forward?
Well, Omar al-Bashir did a great job, in sidelining the Islamists, dividing them, undermining their credibility, and therefore I don't see that the Islamist movement per se at this time has enough of clarity on its trajectory and what to do with all these developments. Therefore, I'm not very worried about the Islamist organizing as an opposition. There would be some perhaps who have, in their own capacity as opinion leaders and makers to voice positions and defend what remains of the credibility of the Islamist movement. But the Islamist movement did a lot of harm to itself because 30 years in absolute power is bound to undermine its legitimacy and credibility.
All right, we have run out of time, so we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Abdelwahab El-Affendi, Hajooj Kuka, and Suliman Baldo. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.